can change
If
the
business
world.
is the driver of social change, then what's the culture going to be? Well, we're going to find out with Steve Gandara from Excellent Cultures. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Stan. It's great to be here.
Excellent Cultures, what is that?
Well, we're a firm that specializes in using scientific data, much like a doctor uses an MRI or an X-ray, to cut through the clutter of what's going on in an organization or a business, get to what really matters fast, and cause rapid change.
Is the premise right? Is business actually the driver of social change?
Well, typically, I would say that people are the drivers of social change, and when you put people together in a group, then synergy happens and powerful things take place. And it seems like businesses and governments, but businesses seem to be the environments where change can happen in an organization quickly because profits are tied to the change gauge.
Now, where do you work?
We work all over North America primarily, a little bit in Europe, Latin America, but for the most part, the continental United States.
Now, you do work with the companies in the sense that the companies only work in North America?
Well, no, we have clients. In fact, the largest number of our clients are global businesses. Our smallest client has 18 employees. Our largest has over 20,000 and has a presence on every continent.
Okay. So the reason that I've asked you here is because of primarily this one statement. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, it's a Peter Drucker statement, and this isn't hardcore business that we're talking about today. This indeed is about social change. Does culture really eat strategy for breakfast in dealing
absolutely.
with business? How
Absolutely.
How so?
Well, just take a look at a simple example of a family. And my wife reminds me of this frequently in our family because we have a large one. Just imagine culture being a magnifying glass that's placed on the relationships that exist between people. And if they're relationships of trust and caring and confidence, then good things happen. If they're relationships of mistrust or frustration or all the things that cause people stress, then bad things happen. And typically what happens in organizations of all types and sizes, especially businesses because they're so tied to the profit meter for survival, is that things start getting swept under the table because human beings don't necessarily enjoy embracing conflict. Most of us would rather avoid it if we could. And the problem with...
Wait a minute, have you watched the news about Congress lately?
No comment, no comment. I'm anti all parties now, all parties now.
But you said that things tend to get swept under the table. What do you mean by that?
Well, Congress is a great example. So typically what happens is when it becomes about politics, which in a business culture you would call that an approval culture. Everybody gets more emotional gratification, and in politics it's about numbers of that reflect gratification. When people get more emotional gratification out of being liked than they do out of doing what's best for the customer, best for the employee, best for the stakeholders, then sneaky corporate politics begin to breed and become alive, and before you know it, you could have an Enron if it goes on forever.
Probably everybody out there watching who has ever worked in a large company has been engaged in corporate politics. I'm not saying that they were starting it, but you've been affected by it.
Sure.
Is that what you mean by business culture?
Yeah, it just happens. I mean, it just happens, and there's different kinds of them. And the scientific instruments that we use that were not developed by Excellent Cultures, they were developed by scientists who specialize in these sorts of things. Our challenge is to de-academize and de-scientificize the content, much like a doctor does for their patients, so that you can understand if you just eat a little differently and take this medication and exercise more, good things will happen. So what happens is this all happens below the surface, much like an iceberg. When you look at an iceberg on a cruise in Alaska, everyone's up on a deck on a beautiful clear day and they say, oh, look at the iceberg. Well, what they're really looking at is the top 10% of the iceberg because 90% is floating below the water. And it's that 90% below the water that in fact is driven by the currents and causes the iceberg to move. And unfortunately, what businesses or organizations who don't realize that Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast constantly do is they spend billions of dollars hiring tugboats to come and move the iceberg into a different channel, only to find that when the tugboats run out of fuel and go back to the dock to refuel, the current takes over and the 90% below the water moves the berg back to where it was before.
But if I'm going to change the culture of my company, or if I'm going to impact the culture of my company, I got to look at myself first.
Exactly. Exactly.
Are CEOs willing to do that?
I would say enlightened CEOs are, and CEOs that are passionate about moving their cultures to the next level. Amazingly, only 10% of our clients are organizations who really need the help. Most of them are high-performance organizations who have good cultures who are looking to move from good to great, as in Collins's work on good to great. You know, it's easier to turn a lousy culture into a great one than it is a good one, but there are enough good leaders that are out there that pay attention to it, that are looking for greatness, and that's pretty much our sweet spot.
Let me make sure I understand this. You say it's easier to turn a lousy corporate culture into a good one than it is to turn a good one into a great one? Is
exactly.
that right? Why is that?
Well, because you just, again, look at the examples of humanity. When, you know, look at diet and exercise, what we were talking about before the show, and my own life's example. You know, I've been thinner and leaner and healthier than I was before, and we all know what it takes to be thinner and leaner and healthier, but it's not what we know that makes a difference, it's what we do with what we know. And most every organization, that same type of phenomena, you know, exists. It's not what we know, it's what we do with what we know that makes a difference. And it's real easy to get comfortable with success, a lot easier to get more comfortable with success than it is with failure. And if you look at any of the, let's say from years ago, in the Search of Excellence books, the research that Tom Peters did, all of those stories are not about good companies that achieve greatness. They're about companies that are on the verge of disaster. And if everyone's going to lose their job, and the wolf is at your door, so to speak, it's a lot easier to make change happen than it is if you've had 5 good back-to-back years and things are heading up.
Is it true that business culture equals bottom line results?
Oh, absolutely.
How so?
Well, look at any company. Microsoft, for example, great company, great growth pattern, tremendous success, changed the whole planet for the better. One of my colleagues was the former global director of sales and marketing for Microsoft, and became so frustrated that she resigned her position to become an outside consultant because it was so much easier for her to get change implemented as an outsider than it was as an insider, and has actually had more success, you know, as an outsider than insider, because the larger the company, the more tendency there is for silos to emerge, where it's just a whole bunch of individual teams. And profit centers are Peter Drucker kind of invented profit centers as well, but would tell you that profit centers have some good, some bad, and some ugly. The good is it helps you focus on what's really important to a more minute detail in your business, but the bad news is when a competitive culture emerges that is more passionate about beating each other than they are the real competition.
Again, like Congress.
Oh yeah, like Congress. There you go. You know, where it becomes more about beating the other guy than it does doing what's right for the stakeholders. And that's humanity. You look at an NFL football team. The culture that's in place in the preseason is everybody competing for the position. Now, if you try to take that culture to the playoffs, you would not get past the first game, because the culture has to change. And in the process of the culture changing, everybody comes together and it becomes more about beating the guys on the other side of the line than it does each other. And that's what happens in businesses of all sizes. Now, you don't have to have tens of thousands employees like a Microsoft to have a culture of silos or a competitive culture. It can happen in a culture of a dozen people.
So that was my next question then. Does what you're talking about with regard to business culture and driving social change and changing culture to affect bottom line results, does it matter the size of your company?
No.
So
no.
It could be a 2 or 3, 5
Could be a
person.
family. Yeah, could be a family. I mean, just look at the dynamics that take place, in a family as children grow up, and as a child becomes a teenager, and different focus points and different pressures from the outside, and different changes are required.
Now, you work largely with global companies.
Well, mostly our sweet spot is mid-market to Fortune 5, so yeah, global companies.
We're talking about business culture here. Does the culture that's different from the West? Let's say you've got a company that is doing business here in North America, but is also doing business in Mexico. We'll say in Mexico as well as a large in the United States. Does that matter in what you do? Does that matter in the corporate culture?
Oh, it does matter, but not to the extent that most people would think it matters. So, for example, based upon all the research that's been done, and again, the reason our process works and has worked well for over 36 years is because it's grounded in science. It's grounded in science, it's grounded in the data that influences science, not somebody's bright idea that they just came up with that doesn't have any research behind it. So, in essence, just take a look at companies in Latin America, for example, where we've worked. Latin Americans, by way of the national culture, are more familial than folks in the United States. The family unit is more important. And in the context of the family unit, you have the father figure, male-dominated father figure, more impactful in the business culture in Latin American cultures than here. Yet, but to a certain effect. However, there are 4 driving factors that, if you look at these 4, make an impact in every business on the planet. The first one is achievement. A successful culture is about people who are all about setting and achieving goals. The second is self-actualization. A high-performance culture is about people who continuously improve, and they're passionate about always getting better. The third, the scientists call humanistic encouraging. That's a culture where people care more about human beings as fellow human beings than about what can you do for me, or what's your job description or your function. And the fourth, the scientists call affiliative, which is about team. In a high affiliative culture, a crisis arises and the people run to huddles to solve the problem. In a low affiliative culture, a crisis arises and they run to silos. So if you look at those 4 dominant driving factors, they make impact no matter what nation you're on, what the country culture is, what the language is. Those are pretty much the drivers, although there are some subtle differences.
All right, well, let's go to the Harvard Business School and their culture study. It's non-adaptive culture versus adaptive culture. And I know this may sound professorial here, but as you hear this, think about your own place where you work, or think about your own family. So, all right, non-adaptive versus adaptive. What is that?
Well, 2 really smart professors at the Harvard Business School in the late 80s and early 90s, John Cotter and James Heskett, did a study, and it was kind of a landmark study in the field of culture. You know, Peter Drucker, bless him, passed away a few years ago, but he knew it years ago from his research. Yet in the current times, the first time that anybody really studied what impact does culture have on the financial side of a business was at the Harvard Business School in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, the book is still available today. John Cotter, James Heskett. It's called Corporate Culture and Performance. Or listen closely and we'll give you the Cliff Notes. We'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So in essence, what these 2 brilliant Harvard professors did was they studied 207 firms for 11 years. These were Wall Street firms, so all of the data was, publicly available, and from all different industries. And the question that they asked was, what impact does the culture have on the financials of the business? And they measured the financial performance in revenue, sales. They measured hiring, people growth. They measured shareholder value, what happened to the stock price, and they measured profitability. And what they found was, in the study, 207 firms over 11 years, that there were basically 2 dominant types of cultures that emerged. They call them adaptive and non-adaptive. And what's really interesting is that while the adaptive cultures exceeded and everyone would expect that they would, with change being, the dominant factor, they exceeded at such a phenomenal rate that it really set the pace. For example, the adaptive cultures outperformed the non-adaptive cultures in revenue and sales. Well, now keep in mind, the non-adaptive cultures over 11 years increased their sales, their revenues about 10% a year. The adaptive cultures compared to the non-adaptive outperformed them 4 to 1.
Well, let's define this. What is a non-adaptive culture and what is an adaptive culture inside a business?
Well, the simplest answer is adaptive cultures adapt to the changes around them and make the most of them, and non-adaptive cultures resist, and they resist either passively with head nodding and smiling and thumbs up kind of leadership like you see in Congress, or they resist aggressive like the guys out on the streets who are angry about this and they're carrying signs around. But they resist. They don't adapt. They don't find ways to collaborate, to partner, to work together, to solve problems, to make a difference, because and if they might act like it if they're a passive defensive culture.
So is this like a company with a bunch of yes men, middle managers who are kind of seemingly just there to collect a paycheck?
Yeah, that would be called a passive defensive culture. And yeah, a yes man culture is a head nodding, smiling, everything's beautiful boss, but deep down inside, there's different things going on.
How do you identify that? You go in, you're hired by a company to come in and say, help us get to the next level.
Well, there's some, we use science. There's some brilliant scientists that over 30 years ago out of the University of Michigan developed a set of instruments that have now been around for over 30 years and used all over the globe, and literally tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of organizations and companies now, and millions of people. So the data is out there that will tell you. Now the great news of that series of instruments is they're statistically valid and scientifically accurate, and they never miss. The bad news is they're so loaded with academia and science that it takes, just like the medical profession. You want science, you want data, you want scientific accuracy, but you don't want to go to your doctor and get a bunch of medical jargon. You want to get, what should I do to fix it? What can I do to fix it? Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the job that our coaches play, is taking the data and then helping business leaders understand it, relate to it, strategize around it, and make a difference.
But if a non-adaptive company, on average, was making 10% a year, that's not bad.
Well, it's not bad, but when you look at the rest of the numbers, the non-adaptive people, hired 36% more people, but the adaptive cultures outperformed that 7 times. Shareholder value, so imagine investing your 401k and getting a 74% return over 11 years. Mm-hmm. Compared to the adaptive guys got a 901% return.
Oh, that is a little different.
Oh, much different. Much different. Now the big number though, why the huge difference between 901% and 74%? Because when you looked at the bottom line, the profitability, the non-adaptive cultures collectively, collaboratively increased their profitability 1%. Even though their revenue increased 166% over the 11 years, and the adaptives improved 756%.
What's the cause of a non-adaptive culture in business?
Well, it's people. I mean, it's people being normal.
Bad CEOs, bad boards of directors, bad executive teams?
I wouldn't call them bad, I'd call them naive. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go to work today and make all of my people angry. Really. Yet the recent Gallup poll tells us that once again, 2 years later, October to October, 70% of the American workforce is disengaged in their job. This year there's a new statistic in Gallup's data. 18% say they literally hate their jobs, and the most common reason for hating your job is you hate your boss. And no one wakes up in the morning saying, okay, my goal today is to go to work and cause all of my people to hate me and perform at their lowest because they hate me.
Okay, so you've set me up here. Who are some of those bad guys?
I think that's coming on the next show. No. A couple of examples. Like, for example, in the Harvard study, many of the firms that were in that study are in business today. For example, the non-adaptive culture retailer was Kmart. What's Kmart doing today? Closing stores, merging with Sears to come out of bankruptcy. The adaptive was Walmart. And look at the comparison between Kmart and Walmart. Same business, almost the same products, homogeneous products, but different cultures. The adaptive, for example, the non-adaptive, let's say, airline was Western Airlines, now Delta. What's Delta doing today? Merging with Northwest to come out of bankruptcy. The adaptive airline everybody knows was Southwest. So the adaptive versus non-adaptive is all about, no word better describes it than the culture of the organization, the shared beliefs, the heartfelt attitudes, not the printed values, but the values that people carry in their hearts and they act like. all those sorts of things. As Peter Drucker said, that's what eats strategy for breakfast.
Is this what you're talking about? Academia trying to put a label on bad behavior?
Well, I don't think so. I think academia tries to solve problems in an academic sort of way. And bad behavior is the default drive for the human race. You know, we all do things when we're not at our best that we wish that we hadn't done. Yet, when you have an excellent culture, which is what our process is all about, you have people around you who coach you and encourage you and ping you in a positive way to help you stay on track, much like my wife has done for me for the last 40 plus years. I can always count on her to tell me where I'm missing the mark and where I need, to improve, and that's very valuable. Now, again, there are cultures that have people that provide that kind of data, but they get punished for telling the truth, or even the truth as they think it is. And when you have people that fear telling the truth because it's bad politics, it's a sheer formula for a disaster. Just a question of how long.
We talked earlier about a different kind of culture, not a business culture, but the culture that we live in, and how some of the businesses that you deal with multiple cultures. Mm-hmm. That being the case, here on Rainmakers, we have dealt with people for years who have been in a really strongly male-dominated society.
Yep.
And are the things that you're talking about, are they adaptive to that society as well?
Well, everybody can change if they want to change and they know how to change. But when you look at male-dominated societies, let's face it, every society was a male-dominated society before. And it's only recently that science has identified that women and men are different, and women have value that can be added to a corporate environment that men can't, just because of the nature of the differences in how we think, how we process, our mental capabilities, our physical differences. And in the sweet spot of high performance is in what we can do together, and what we can do when we get, much like an athletic team. What can we do when we all pull together towards a common goal and set our differences aside? You don't have to be a scientist or have a PhD to understand that one.
At the same point in time, I have sat across the table from CEOs, and in 2 minutes you can tell if that CEO's ego will not allow for collaboration. Mm-hmm. Is that non-adaptive culture, or is that, again, just bad behavior?
I would say it's naivety and ignorance. I had the opportunity to listen to a very prolific, productive CEO the other day, speaking to a group of other CEOs, and he started his comments with the statement that top-down management is dead, and it really is. In a millennial generation where kids are brilliant and have technology as an appendage to their body, not just a tool, nobody has to put up with bosses that lead that way anymore, unless, of course, you're in the military. And what happens if I don't is you get shot or you get court-martialed. And even the military has done made tremendous changes in leadership and moving away from the top-down, everybody, one person knows it all strategy.
Are there companies out there with top-down strategies today?
Lots of them.
And okay, which ones?
Lots of them. Well, without naming any, I would say just look at the news. Look at the news and look at what's working and what's not working. And it's easy to tell because you just said it. If you have a CEO whose ego, or I've met with women CEOs whose egos are so big that they don't want to hear. It's not a guy-gal thing. Mm-hmm. If a CEO's ego is so big that they don't want to hear feedback, that's the first sign of trouble.
Are there industries, and I'm pointing at financial services, that are fraught with more kinds of more non-adaptive than adaptive cultures?
It's not industry specific. It's more leadership specific and attitudinal specific. Recently, we've seen a lot of news about the debacles in the financial services industries, simply because of the focus on the economy. And all of a sudden, the magnifying glass came on folks and started going deeper and looking at the truth that used to get ignored. And then we had a lot of implosions. So I would say from the research that I've seen, it's not industry specific. I mean, leadership is about people, not about industry. Now, there are some certain types of industries that, you know, to survive, to succeed, require different focus and different application. But if it's a people-driven business, which most are, even technology firms are people-driven businesses. I mean, watch Apple now that Steve Jobs has passed on. I mean, nobody knows where they're going to be or what's going to happen or what the next level is.
But he wasn't a nice man.
Well, he wasn't. He built a culture of high innovation where people were afraid to get into the elevators, and intimidated because of his brilliance and because of his leadership style. Yet, in that particular industry where it was all about, more about the technology than the people who produced it, it worked, and it worked exceedingly well. But now that that particular persona and personality is passed on, the future remains to be seen. What's going to emerge that builds the next generation of Apple? So, is it going to emerge in a fashion that causes people to gel together, to be all that they can be, to set and achieve goals, to care about each other as fellow human beings, and be a team? Or is it going to be one that is full of sneaky corporate politics where people smile at each other to be nice and stab each other in the back to get to the top of the ladder, but nobody talks about it?
An example, at least from the public standpoint, from me, who's looking just on the outside, who doesn't know anything, it appears to me that Google has a very collaborative culture.
Yes, they seem to. In fact, there was a lot of evidence about that about a year ago, where an executive, a leader in Amazon, left Amazon, went to Google and published a spreadsheet on social media that differentiated between the Amazon culture and the Google culture. And there was a whole lot of back and forth debate that took place as a result of it. Don't know if any legal challenges came out of it, but yeah, Google has seemed to have built within the technology space a culture that hits those four sweet spots that we talk about. Conversely, you have companies like Amazon that aren't known for having great culture in those areas, but they're very successful because for the moment, it's more about the technology than it is about the people. And in some cases that might go on, but you never know.
And you know what, Steve? I've got to ask our guest a favor. We have an hour or maybe even 2 hours worth of questions left, but we have about 15 seconds. So Steve, will you stay with us for one more show? I'm
looking forward to it.
Okay, we're going to have part 2 coming up. This is Steve Gandara from Excellent Cultures right here on Rainmakers, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Rainmaker believes we can change the world. One life, one heart, one soul, one mind at a time. Rainmaker believes we can change the world. Live to inspire and to be inspired. To be inspired. A generation's opportunity, a chance to make a real change. Lead us into harmony.